Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Film Club with the Holocaust Educational Trust. My name is Ben Fuller. I'm an education officer here at the Holocaust Educational Trust, and it's great to be with you once again to talk about another film. This week we're going to be talking about Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, which is definitely worth talking about. I'm not sure how much of a Holocaust film it is really, but it's definitely an interesting film to discuss. So we're going to come on to that shortly. But first, I do want to make a little plug and a shout out for teachers. I hope you're enjoying the first week or two of the holiday. And it looks like the weather's come to join you as well at last, which is fantastic news. But over the course of the summer and beyond, we have an awful lot of stuff going on with the Holocaust Educational Trust for teachers, particularly a range of seminars that are taking place to look out for. And also I want to bring your attention to the fact that we are bringing our outreach program online now. So if you would like to organise for a Holocaust survivor to speak to students at your school, then even though we can't bring them to you in person, we do now have availability for the autumn term for you to get a Holocaust survivor speaking to your class via Zoom. So really amazing experience, no matter how you experience it. The opportunity to ask questions and engage in person with a Holocaust survivor is one that is not to be missed. So I would really encourage teachers, as you're sort of planning the next few months of life in school or outside of school, or however it's going to work, we don't really know yet, but do get in touch with us. Have a look on the website het.org.uk and see if you can get involved with some of what's going on there. Okay, so onwards with this show and the film Inglourious Basterds. So this came out in 2009, directed by Quentin Tarantino, his sixth feature film, if you count Kill Bill's Volume 1 and 2 as one film together. Very much a mixed reception, sort of critically, more focused on his directorial style and way of storytelling than the issues that probably we are more likely to discuss in terms of its relationship to the past and how it represents the Holocaust. But nevertheless, it drew a lot of attention. It was very publicly very well received, particularly from the reading I've done. The German audience really got into it, perhaps found it something that was finally an opportunity to kind of look back at Nazism in a slightly humorous way, and in a way that kind of was detached enough that wasn't just riddled with sort of the kind of common feelings around guilt about the past, but actually, making fun of it, which is quite interesting. I also believe it's sort of found that it seemed to go down quite well in Israel, which is interesting, a country that, you kind of want to know what they're going to feel about a film that takes the Holocaust narrative and twists it so radically. So some interesting stuff to get stuck into. I'll go through, as per usual, I'll just give a quick synopsis of the storyline. It's hard to give a quick synopsis of this storyline because it's somewhat convoluted, so I'll go very simple, and then we'll get looking at some of the comments that you've made over the past couple of weeks on our social media. And I would encourage, please do throw your questions up in the comments box on Facebook here. Add your thoughts. I'd really like to know what you thought about it, what you liked or didn't, and why. We get a lot of comments of, I thought this was a great film, but I want to know why. I want to know what it is that you really picked up that kind of made you think it was good or not. So please do get involved, and I'll try and keep up with the comments better than usual. So what is this film all about? We start the film with a very long and intricately created scene, very deliberate. I think we can fairly safely say from the start, and then leave it, that Tarantino is very deliberate with pretty much everything that he creates, and there's no mistakes, there's no kind of accidental ways of portrayal. It's all very much choreographed. But we start with this scene where one of our main characters, who's played by Christoph Waltz, Colonel Hans Lander, known as the Jew Hunter, visits a French farm to find the whereabouts of Jews he believes are hiding in that at that residence, and indeed he does work out by his questioning style that there are Jewish people being protected there, and he has them killed. And one of those Jewish people, a young lady called Shoshana, escapes, and she joins the film at a later point. In fact, she escapes and moves to Paris, where she takes over the running of a cinema, which is going to be used after a kind of a quasi-romance or romantic endeavor, at least, from a German soldier who is the star of a new film that Goebbels has created, and insists that this should be the site where the film is premiered. And in the eventuality, as well as Goebbels being in attendance, Hitler himself arrives, partly because he wants to reassert himself into the public spotlight and show a lack of fear of a kind of guerrilla army group from America that are known as the Bastards. These are a group led by our third main character. So we have Colonel Hans Landa, we have Shoshana, and we have Brad Pitt playing Lieutenant Aldo Raine. And his character is of Native American descent, which we'll come to shortly. There's a reason for that. As I said, everything's deliberate in the Tarantino film. And he pulls together a band of Jewish Americans who are going to drop in behind enemy lines and kill as many Nazis as they possibly can. Specifically, and this is the first link to his Native American roots, Aldo Raine asks that his group, the Bastards, scalp their victims and use that as a trophy, and he demands, he claims a debt of 100 scalps per member of the group. So we get a sense of what's to follow, and indeed we do see some incredibly brutal scenes as the Bastards get through, sort of work their way through France, finding Nazis and killing them, always except for one who is sent away to tell the German people of what they've encountered. The idea is that they're kind of almost like basically a terrorist group. They want to inspire fear into the hearts of the Germans, and the person that they let go, they don't allow to get off scot-free. Aldo Raine carves a swastika into their forehead so that they will always be known as a Nazi. So as the film progresses, Aldo Raine and his group link up with some British intelligence to go to this film premiere and basically assassinate as many Nazis as they can. They don't realise Hitler's going to be there at first, but they still think it'll be a very powerful act to do. Meanwhile, Shoshana, as the proprietor of this movie screen, who also is Jewish, who also has lost her whole family to the Nazis, plots her own revenge attack, where she's going to set fire to the cinema and thus kill all of the Nazis that are in attendance. So there's an awful lot going on, and at the end, and this is, I mean, obviously this entire film is a complete fiction. It doesn't present itself in any other way, but as if you hadn't got that idea by those final scenes, Shoshana is successful insofar as the cinema is burned. The Bastards are successful insofar as they get into the screening and indeed kill Hitler. And again, this is a particularly powerful cinematic moment, I think, and something that's quite daring and interesting that possibly hadn't been done up until now. So, and at the end, Colonel Hans Landa, who appears to have got himself out of any retribution or justice for what he's been doing as the Jew hunter, which is a name that he takes a certain amount of pride in, he orchestrates a kind of how we say it? He orchestrates his own I'm losing my words today, guys. What was the word? Surrender, but on his own terms. But Aldo Raine gets the last laugh by carving the Nazi swastika into his forehead too. So he will live. He won't come to true justice, but he will forever be marked with the swastika. So, what a mess, for starters. This is entirely anti-history. There's nothing that we can learn from this about the Holocaust. But so what's interesting, and what I think I want to focus our discussion on, is the portrayal of different characters, and try and get inside why certain people certain people sort of have picked up on narratives beneath the surface, because certainly from the kind of surface level, then this is a revenge fantasy film that is sort of got a very dark sense of humor and has all the kind of traits of a Tarantino film within it. But there's a lot more to it that I think I'd like to discuss. So before I get into some of that stuff, I'm going to just pick up on some of the comments that people have made, and that can lead us into discussion. It's that, again, some really positive feedback for the film in general. Miriam says, hands down, one of my favourite movies. I've got another comment from Sarah Stanbridge. She says, on a totally unintellectual level, I love it. I like the cartoonishness of it, and really like the Jews as non-victim, as a non-victim narrative, which I'm going to pick up on in just a second. There was a really interesting discussion. Thank you to Alison, Bethany, and Zara, who pointed me in the direction of an academic article, which I also want to come to in a minute, by where's her name? Let's get this right. By Stella Stetka, who investigates a lot of the subtext of what's going on in the film. So I'm going to come to that in a moment too. But perhaps it's a good place to start to look to come back to the comment from Bethany Morrison. That's from Sarah Stamp. Bethany says she's recently written an essay on this. So Bethany, if you're watching, tell me what you thought. I'm really glad that you've written an essay and you're looking forward to watching this, but I want to know what you think. So do add a comment, please. But I'm going to come back to Sarah, who says she liked the Jews as non-victims narrative, and I think that's a really important thing, that in a film that is not outright about the Holocaust, it is a film that gives Jewish people agency in a way that a lot of Holocaust films tend not to do. If we look at films like Schindler's List, for example, then there is a critique of that film that says it's portraying Jews as very much lambs to the slaughter, as not really having any agency in what's happening to them. So that's so instantly, by having Shoshana as such a very strong character and very developed character, a person who's enacting a very powerful act of resistance, there's something that this film does that others don't, that perhaps kind of speaks to Jewishness in a different way than many of the films do. There was another question. There's a question that came from Screen Star. Don't know the actual name, but that's your Twitter name. And you said, I'd like to know what people think of the scene in the restaurant where Hans has a conversation with Shoshana, using the alias Emmanuel. Do you think he knows who she really is? So that, to give you all context, and I'm assuming you've all watched the film, but yes, Hans arrives at the moment just after Shoshana's been introduced to Goebbels to say, this is the person whose theatre we should use for the screening, and Hans walks in. Shoshana obviously instantly recognises him, and the question there is, does he recognise her? And I think that's what Tarantino is kind of wanting us to ask for the whole of that scene. There's a very powerful tension throughout the scene on whether or not he's going to kind of come clean and say he knows who she is. He has a very long-winded way of getting around to letting people know that he's all over what they're trying to achieve. So that's not a surprise that he doesn't go, oh, it's you. As it is, I don't think that he does recognise her. I think that this is all about her paranoia, as Daniel says. It's her paranoia of being discovered. But there's something that Tarantino is kind of wanting us to think is, does he know who he's talking to here? I'm not convinced that he does, because I do think that he would have given that away certainly before the end of the film. There's another question that I need to find here, which was where is it? I always put these things down in the wrong place. Jack Baldwin kind of raised the point of how Tarantino presents those in Nazi uniforms. For example, the sergeant we see killed by the bear Jew, who's one of the bastards, like how guilty he was, etc. So yeah, there is a clear and a very simple narrative going on. There's good guys and bad guys in this film, and Tarantino is picking up on a very sort of there's a very obvious reference to the Western film genre where we have good guys and bad guys. Perhaps the character of Hans Landa is something that sort of skews that a little, because obviously he's deeply a bad guy, but there's something in his character that is entertaining. He has an amazing ability to be incredibly polite, even as he goes about his horrific work, and I think that again is another challenge. So possibly not one that we need to dwell on, whether or not it's possible to be a likable Nazi, but I think that's something that he's just sort of thrown in there to get us thinking. I want to turn to the article that like I said, Alison and one or two other people referenced, Bethany and Zara, which is by Stella Secker, who looks at the film from a very different perspective altogether, goes really underneath the surface of it and tries to understand all of those very deliberate things that Tarantino is doing. And what this article kind of concludes is that Tarantino is using the Holocaust as a way of reflecting back, particularly on the American public, other genocides that America has been complicit or actively involved in. And she quotes Tarantino himself saying that the film broadly examines the tragedy of genocide. He says, "I'm dealing with the genocide in Europe, but my Jews are going native and taking the roles of American Indians, another genocide. And then there's a King Kong metaphor about the slave trade. That's another genocide." So, and there we come back to the character of Lieutenant Aldo Raine, who's got this Native American personal history, and that he's using these sort of Native American guerrilla warfare tactics. Again, is a reference point to say, well, actually, we're looking specifically and directly at the Holocaust, but it's encouraging, maybe inviting the viewer to reflect back on his personal history, those tactics, and American involvement in a genocide of the Native Americans. So that's one level where the film is kind of trying to speak to other historical events. There's two key references to attitudes towards African Americans. One in the scene where the Bastards and the Gestapo member of the Nazi Party are playing a game of guess the sort of famous person on my forehead, and they go for King Kong, and he assumes that this is a story of the African slave trade. So again, Tarantino brings out another sort of crime against humanity that's been committed rather than in Europe, far away from America and their viewers, actually on the same land, and it invokes a concept known as screen memory, which is by remembering one traumatic past, we essentially shield ourselves from having to think about others that may be closer to home, that may be more problematic for our situation, our way of life, etc. So, well, I think that there's some real legs in this argument, because as you look at the film through this prism, then you do see a range of points where it's clearly referencing other events as well as the Holocaust. Also, I think that something else that Secker points out is in the final scene, the use of where the camera is looking plays a very important role for us as the viewers. So as Aldo Raine carves this swastika, and it's a brutal scene because it's very graphic, as he carves the swastika into the forehead of Hans Landa, firstly, we're looking from Raine's perspective at the Nazi, at the perpetrator, and he's receiving some level of justice. But but then the camera flips and takes you to looking at Aldo Raine from the perspective of Hans Landa. So now we are, and to quote the article, with a simple shift in camera position, the film turns its viewers into Nazis, into perpetrators. So perhaps there's something going on there where the film is actually encouraging us to do some serious thinking, even though it's in the context of this sort of graphic, farcical, comedic revenge fantasy. There is something serious that lies just beneath. that Tarantino might be encouraging us to think about. So there's some really interesting threads in there that I'd encourage you guys to have a think about. Right, I said I'd look at comments, so let's have a look at some of the comments we've got so far, and then we'll crack on, because there's a few other things I want to mention. It's already 5:20, goodness. And it's hot up here today, I've got to say. So, Till Schweiger, who played Stieglitz, had always refused to be in a war film wearing a Nazi uniform. And only agreed to do this film wearing the uniform as his character was killing Nazis. That's an interesting little fact that I wasn't aware of. I mean, what's also interesting is that this film did cast a lot of very well-respected German actors who, you know, obviously willingly got involved with the plot and the story, and that's the kind of interesting thing that in the case of Till Schweiger, he was only happy to play the role because it was going to be killing Nazis, whereas obviously Christoph Waltz is who's Austrian, you know, absolutely goes full bore into the character of a very evil and conniving Nazi. Chloe says, I really didn't know how to feel about this film. I generally don't like fiction when it comes to films about the Holocaust, as it feels somewhat disrespectful. However, there are some aspects of the film which are interesting. For example, the portrayal of Jews fighting back against the Nazis, which contradicts the popular narrative of Jews simply being led to the slaughter. Absolutely, Chloe. And again, I'm stealing from Setka's article somewhat here when I kind of pick up on that, because she raises the issue that it's not just the Jews who are given agency in this film. We have a very strong female character who takes on the Nazis. So another traditionally marginalized part of society being brought to the fore, given a voice, given power. We have the Native American leader given a voice, given power. We have even Shoshana's boyfriend Marcel, who is characterized in that scene in the restaurant as quite simply just being a black person. She very clearly says, this is his name, this is where he's from. She humanizes him, and I think that there's a theme within the film of giving power to marginalized groups, and again, perhaps as a sort of as a little prod at the viewing public, that these are, you know, perhaps we're surprised to see this because historically they are persecuted groups. We don't recognize them in the way that we should. So I think maybe there's something going on here. Wow, Jess, you've written me an essay, so I'm going to try and skim it rather than read the whole thing. Two minds until I thought about this film, until I read some articles about Eli Roth, the actor who played Donnie Donovitz, the Bear Jew. He was Tarantino's unofficial advisor. Okay, I'm going to just pick up there because I can't read that fast and think at the same time, quite simply. But yeah, Eli Roth is a really interesting character as a person, because, you know, you've mentioned he was an unofficial advisor, he's Jewish, he reveled in the opportunity to be part of a revenge sort of against the Nazi plot, which, you know, for many people is kind of empowering and sort of great fun and a good, you know, is a really positive fantasy. However, others have pointed out that this could be problematic because essentially, rather than being empowering and satisfying, some could say that having Jewish characters being, you know, brutally violent is essentially painting them as displaying the same characteristics that the Nazis displayed. And some people have said that that's not okay. This is not the way that justice should be served. This is not the way that Jews have asked for justice to be served. And actually, it's kind of aligning behaviours, which makes us which also challenges us in terms of the way we think about those behaviours. So there's a really interesting thing going on there, where there's a sort of a bit of a split. On the one side, we've got this very satisfying film where we get to see Hitler get killed and we get to see the revenge. On the other side, we're seeing violence and brutality almost mirrored into the other side, which could make us feel a little bit queasy and certainly unrepresentative. I'm going to carry on down your comment though, Jess, because there's so much good stuff going on in here. Okay, Roth also said that the story of revenge was everyone's fantasy about going back in time and changing history. What would I have done? It was everything you ever wanted to see in your dreams. He mentioned how cathartic it was for German actors who usually cringe during war films and look through the eyes of guilt. So absolutely, I think we kind of mentioned that comment earlier about sort of the German public enjoying the film for its kind of farcical nature, for that revenge, and being able to watch it without having to feel that sense of historical guilt burdening down on their shoulders. Seeing Hitler get killed for a German viewer is a kind of, arguably there's some sense of that's what should have happened to it, and that's a powerful thing. Okay. Oh, thanks, Becky. I was just reading your comment, and it's just a general one, but you're really enjoying the sessions, and it's making you think, which is really great. Glad to know that we're doing something useful here. Steve Richardson, who is a top fan, Facebook is telling me, says, I think one of the challenges is to consider what's more important, seeking revenge or moving to forgiveness and reconciliation. So thanks very much, Steve. I think that's something we've been kind of edging towards as a question throughout this session so far, that yes, there is a sort of a primal sense of that we like revenge, and that revenge can be in some way cathartic, but actually what about real justice? And then beyond that, what about forgiveness and reconciliation? Because I would certainly say that, you know, the reason we have a justice system is because revenge is not the way to create justice. That's an emotional response, whereas justice systems create some kind of framework for you know, sort of kind of rendering an act, dealt with bringing people to justice, having the actions that people have made brought into focus, but not just returning it onto them, because that just makes you no better than the person in some people's view. But then towards moving on to forgiveness and reconciliation. Well, this film certainly isn't trying to twist our thoughts towards that, is it? Unless we look at that underlying, those underlying themes and that sort of idea of screen memory and thinking about, well, what have we done with other events? How do we respond to events where there might be some either historical complicity in our own countries or even things that are going on now? So there is a question there, and I think it's one that we should be thinking about, possibly not necessarily in the context of this film. I don't think the film is trying to embrace a forgiving mentality, but perhaps that's one of the benefits of watching a film like this, is that it makes you think of alternative responses, and in that way maybe that's where we can begin to find some use in terms of our viewing of it from our sort of Holocaust history perspective. Okay, there's another comment I definitely need to pick up on, but I can't find it, so I'm going to look at Dean's comment. I totally agree. Oh, thanks, Dean. You're making a nice comment about us too. Totally agree with Becky. The film club has been brilliant. I hope it continues. Well, we're planning to, very much so. Thanks so much. It'd be interesting to get people's views on Amazon Prime's Hunters. Don't worry, that's in our thinking. Because it's a series, though, Dean, at the minute we're sticking to films, but I'd be surprised if we don't get around to it. And you may, if you really trawl back through our Twitter feed on Het, then you'll find that we certainly did have some strong views, and there are some, and I'm second-hand information here because I haven't got around to watching it myself, but I certainly am aware of some fictitious portrayals that seem to be quite unnecessarily brutal when in the situation of Auschwitz. I don't think there's any reason to kind of invent forms of brutality that weren't there when there was so much horrific stuff there. So what quite is going on with that program, I need to get my head around myself first, but I think it is one that we'll bring to this space at some point. Okay, I want to wrap this up because I know that there's lots of other stuff going on, and for any ambassadors that are watching, there's a fantastic event happening in about 10-15 minutes. So I think I will leave it there. I think that we should, to sort of summarize, I think we've got a really interesting film here. It's perfectly okay for opinions to be split on this, not least because opinions are generally split on Tarantino's film and style, but also the concept of an anti-history revenge fantasy. But I would encourage you to, as you kind of think on about it, to think about those sub-narratives and kind of those subtextual comments that are being made on us as viewers, that's inviting us to think about the world around us, and maybe kind of say, well, yeah, we're comfortable with Holocaust film. There's an argument this film is a critique of Holocaust cinema, because we've got very comfortable with it, but it doesn't challenge us very much. When we watch a lot of Holocaust films, they generally tie themselves off quite neatly without leaving us with much to think about, whereas this film is kind of saying, do you know what, the Holocaust should leave us thinking, and by twisting the narrative of it, maybe that will encourage us so to do. Final comment from Andy. Unfortunately, the justice, or as many call it, revenge, dealt out by, to the SS by both former camp prisoners and Allied forces was dealt out by a different generation dealing with what was there at the time. We live in a different age where justice is dealt through courts, and that's an interesting point as well. That perhaps we have, a luxurious position of looking at it through a historical lens, and the space between ourselves and the event to maybe be a bit overly righteous and suggest that certain types of justice are the right type of justice, whereas actually at the time, because of the rawness and the absolute, the horrific nature of everything that was happening in and around Europe and the Holocaust, revenge didn't seem quite as bad as I'm kind of maybe making it out to be. I'm not sure whether I'm making sense there, but that's an interesting point from Andy. Okay, so yeah, interesting film. Glad we've watched it. Glad we've discussed it, and hope that you found some value in the last half an hour's discussion. Moving on, we are going to take a slightly longer break between the next one, because this guy's got to go on holiday too at some point or another, so I'm off to the Peak District to get in a tent, and so we'll be back in 3 weeks' time, and I'm just trying to remember what that means in terms of an actual date. So 3 weeks from now is sometime in August. Thursday the 20th of August is when we'll be back, and the film that I'm going to encourage you to watch between now and then is called Ida, and I don't want to tell you too much about this film. It's absolutely at the other end of the spectrum, I'd say, from Inglourious Basterds. It's a much more cerebral, it's a foreign language film. It's available for free on Channel 4 online at the minute. I believe they showed it last week, so it's available for the next month for free, and I really want to try and find the free ones as much as possible, so that's part of why we've gone for that this time. So it's going to raise a whole bunch of other questions. This is more about post-war exploration of someone's past, and like I said, much more of a sort of cerebral, quiet flow of a film, quite a different one, but I think really, really interesting, and I'll look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and speaking to you in 3 weeks. So from now until then, have a lovely summer. Enjoy, for those of you who are on holiday, enjoy your time off. For those of you who aren't, hard luck, me neither, and I'll see you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.